Well, reporters caught bashing Governor Sarah Palin this weekend as they covered her speech at a California university. This just days after a Washington Post reporter loses his job for ripping on conservatives he was assigned to cover, including this man, radio talk show host and professor at Chapman University Law School, Hugh Hewitt. All right, Hugh, so let's start with David Weigel of the Washington Post, and then we'll get to these reporters who ripped on Sarah Palin. I want to start with Weigel because you were one of the targets in one of his many emails ripping on conservatives. He referred to you as, and I quote, buffoonish, and that is about the nicest thing we can repeat that he said about Republicans. He was a huge fan of the F word. He used it to describe virtually every Republican you can think of. It was clear from the emails that he sent that he hates Republicans, that he hates conservatives, or at least has a lot of really negative things to say about them. And yet the Washington Post had him covering conservatives. And so when it came out, he was essentially forced to resign. Your take on Weigel?
Megan, good to see you again. Dave is actually a very talented, passionate, very good reporter, and I've been receiving his darts for years. In my business, if you're not getting the darts from people on the left, whether publicly or on email lists, you're not doing your job. I want people in D.C. listening to 1260. I want people in New York listening to AM 970. I want them to listen to the show, and if they don't like what I have to say, or any of my colleagues, you know, Bennett, Gallagher, Prager, Medved, any of those guys, we'd rather be in their sights and over the target than simply not relevant to their conversation. That having been said, the problem is not Dave Weigel. He got screwed here. Someone on this journalist thing, this private email server of 400 different lefty journalists, stabbed him in the back. And I think maybe his youth may have led him to believe that you can trust journalists. And you and I both know you can't trust journalists, even if they are the same ideological bent. They're looking for a story.
Just ask General McChrystal.
Probably the big problem. Yeah, you know, you cannot trust journalists. Journalists will go for the story. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two is if you're going to be the Washington Post and you're going to hire someone to cover the conservatives, be transparent. Don't hire Weigel. I think he was a very good reporter. He was doing a good job at that. But be transparent in what they believe. Now, there are lots of great young conservatives out there. You know them. I know them. Guy Benson, Mary Catherine Ham. There are lots of people who could cover that beat from a genuine center-right perspective if the Washington Post wanted to hire them. Thus far, they've only got lefties at the paper. Dave Weigel has resigned now. He's gone over to MSNBC, where he's going to have to slow down, use small words with Keith and Ed Schultz. But he'll be well served by that venue because he's of that political stripe. On the other hand, the Washington Post, if they want to be genuinely read by people on our side of the political aisle, people that I talk to every day, they're going to have to hire some people who are representative of their point of view.
But here's what I want to ask you. Okay, so, and I think it's great that you can take a punch and that you're fine with Weigel and what he said about you because reporters are allowed to have opinions. But the problem comes when the opinion crosses into what's supposed to be straight journalism. And some of his emails reflect that, for example, when Scott Brown won his Massachusetts Senate seat, he went in there and talked about how vital it was to point out how awful his opponent Martha Coakley was because he says, number one, it's true, and number two, unreasonable panic about it is doing more damage to the Democrats. Now, when you have an agenda like that you're going to put in your straight news reporting and it's not disclosed to the viewers, that's a problem, Hugh.
Well, yeah, I agree with that. Now, agenda journalists come in two varieties, those about whom you don't know their opinions and those about whom you do know. I've been reading Dave for a long time. Like I said, he'd been throwing darts at me from Reason magazine and his other various perches for a long, long time. So I knew he was not a conservative, so I'm not surprised he held these opinions. I think probably the problem is with the Washington Post, who did not adequately display to their readership that what they would be getting is going to be left-wing journalism, or at least iconoclastic journalism. He's not really a left-winger.
And maybe people know that now. Maybe people know that about the Washington Post in particular with respect to this guy. But I want to ask you about these other reporters who were caught on an open mic. It was a Fox affiliate who was covering the Sarah Palin event. The Fox affiliate has since come out and said it wasn't our reporters, it wasn't our crew. It was some other reporters who were caught passing by our open mic, ripping on Sarah Palin as she gave the speech. We've got an excerpt. I want to play it for the viewers.
Oh my God, I feel like I just got off a roller coaster. Flying out of everywhere. Seriously, when you got to write a report as a college student, and you just try to jam as many quotes in as possible, from as many random, things as you can. That's what I got.
She didn't finish a statement. Did she make a statement? Because I didn't catch that either.
All right, so they're being sarcastic about her, and then they go on to say, this is, quote, "The dumbness doesn't just come from sound bites. I can't believe she quoted Kennedy twice. How am I going to write about this? There's nothing there." Answer. Well, there's your story. They clearly don't like Sarah Palin. They're supposed to be straight news journalists, and they're ripping on her as they're supposed to be covering her. Is it a problem?
Oh, it's huge. The arrogance of those people on display there, because they're, quote, straight news journalists. In fact, the deep-seated hostility for Governor Palin. Yeah, we think that. But the deep-seated hostility towards Palin is endemic in the newsrooms of the United States. And what makes it odd, Megyn, the last person to be in her position, an unsuccessful vice presidential candidate, was John Edwards. And for the 4 years after John Edwards ran, he was followed around by a slavishly drooling mainstream media that thought he was just wonderful and smart. In fact, he was a megalomaniac who was a serial philanderer and out of control individual. And the media, because they had this preordained lens about John Edwards, could not break through to the real story. Now they've got this lens about Governor Palin, where they're all so arrogant and thinking that she has not got what it takes to be as smart as they are. In fact, they'd put her up against them any day on any subject. I shared this.
But let me ask you, it's not surprising. I got to go. But it's not surprising that they don't like Sarah Palin, because we've kind of known that about some of the media. But my question for you is, what is so wrong with it? Let me be a contrarian. What's so wrong with those reporters ripping on Sarah Palin? I mean, I can tell you, having covered a lot of events, you know, reporters, anchors, crew, they rip on the people they cover. There's theater in any event, Democrat, Republican, non-party affiliated. Sometimes it's just the theater of the event that you mock. It doesn't mean they don't like Sarah Palin. Does it necessarily mean that they can't cover her fairly if they don't happen to like her? I mean, you know, is there really anything so wrong with it?
Megyn, I do think with Palin, the hostility on the part of the media is disfiguring the coverage of what she has to say. I shared a podium with her in Denver a few weeks ago. She gave an extraordinarily important speech about Iranian sanctions that not a word of which was covered in the mainstream media. They will not cover that stuff from her. So it distorts the coverage. Yes, people in our business are constantly saying things off the record, but we constantly ought to be telling people what our political opinions are so they can adjust for the lie of the green. The people in that room who were slamming Palin are going to go out and hypocritically pretend to be fair-minded, objective reporters who really cannot hold a candle to Sarah Palin's intelligence and accomplishments. That's what drives them in this case, envy, and I think that's what's wrong with that situation.
Yeah, I mean, there is one thing sort of sitting at a dinner party with your friends and offering your opinions. There's another being at the event you're supposed to cover with other reporters there, open mics, and ripping on the subject that you're meant to be covering. In any event, Hugh Hewitt, always interesting hearing your perspective, and I'm sure Dave Weigel will be happy to hear the olive branches out there, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Megyn.